On day 8 of Operation Protective Edge, the Israeli military has committed perhaps its most horrific war crime since the offensive against Gaza began. This morning, devastating news broke of the IDF's intentional shelling of a beach that targeted 4 children aged 9 to 11. The tragedy comes as the death toll in Gaza surpasses 200, at least 39 of which are children, according to the Wall Street Journal. And according to Gaza's Ministry of Health, over 1,500 Palestinians have been injured. But of course, if you ask U.S. officials about the latest beach massacre, it's Hamas's fault these children are dead. As an NBC reporter tweeted, the U.S. State Department says that ultimately Hamas is responsible for the 4 boys dead in Gaza shelling because they didn't agree to the ceasefire proposed by Egypt. You know, it takes a certain kind of willful blindness to continue to blame Hamas every time Israel kills kids. Earlier, I spoke to journalist Harry Fear, who was only meters away from that shelling this morning and who's been living in the occupied territory off and on for 2 years. In fact, right after the interview was conducted, a bomb went off right next door to where Harry was. He and the film crew are unharmed. Now, considering that the Israeli government alerts Palestinians shortly before bombing them, either with leaflets or preemptive explosions, many people don't realize why Gazans can't simply flee the impending attacks. And I started by asking Harry to explain why this is the case.
Since 2007, Gaza has been under a crippling policy of besiegement. There are 2 main civilian crossings, the Erez crossing into Israel and the Rafah crossing into Egypt. And at the moment, Palestinians can't just leave from either. Hundreds of Palestinians that have, well, are lucky enough to have dual citizenship, to have passports other than just a Palestinian passport, have been able to evacuate since this escalation began. But the other almost 9 million Palestinians here are literally imprisoned in a tiny strip of land that's just basically 40 kilometers in length.
There was just a horrific shelling, of course, on the beach in Gaza today where it seems only children were targeted. There were no Hamas targets there on that beach. What's your response to the Israeli government's rhetoric that says it's only targeting Hamas affiliates?
Well, this strike on the 4 children took place just next to my hotel room. And for me, I'm appalled personally and personally shocked and frustrated by this tragedy. I mean, it's disgusting. The killing of these children is unacceptable, and Israel shouldn't be using force when such casualties are going to be made. The children are playing on the beach. Sure, during the night, it's known that militants go into that area, but during the day, I was there, literally 30 meters away from where the children was killed, only 3 hours before they were there. Now, the key here, Abby, is that if I had been there while the children were there, Israel would not have fired. But because there was no international there, Palestinians are easy blood. And so it doesn't matter what Palestinian collateral damage is caused for Israel. And so it fired some kind of Navy shell just at the marina, which killed these boys on the beach.
It's horrific, Harry. Do you think that the international community will treat this as the war crime it is?
No, especially where you are in the USA, of course not. And it's impossible really to imagine a situation in which the European countries will behave integriously in their foreign policy and condemn this and react to it diplomatically. I mean, why is Israel not being made to pay the price diplomatically for these kinds of prima facie war crimes? Just last week, a few days ago, we made a report for RT about the al-Batsh family. I think it was 18 people killed, including 4 children, when Israel struck this home to try and kill Hamas's head of the police. He wasn't even killed, but 4 children were killed. This is another prima facie war crime. What's the world doing about it? Nothing so far, and over recent years, nothing's been done either.
That photo of those 18 graves is just unbelievably tragic, Harry. Your report was excellent on that, and I think it has a lot to do with just this rhetoric that we're hearing, that they're Hamas, and Hamas equals terrorism, and you know, there's all these anti-Palestinian memes going on. One in particular shows this house, and it says a typical Palestinian home, basically tiers of rockets stacked up, and essentially terrorists packed in the house. I mean, have you ever come across a bunker like that?
I've not come across a bunker like that. For sure, there are sites in Gaza which are off bounds to internationals and journalists. Just the day when we were filming a piece, we were told by some just random plain-clothed security personnel not to point the camera there and here. But that's not the point, actually, Abby. The point is that Israel can kill just one person if it wants to. It has, during this operation, committed targeted assassinations where it strikes one person with a drone missile and 20 meters away, someone else is standing, obviously scared for their life. But it can be precise if it wants to. The point is it's not wanting to. And one of the reasons is because the international community won't make Israel pay the price diplomatically. And so Israel can engage in this kind of military activity without really worrying about it. And so we have a situation where around 80% or more Palestinians who have been killed are civilians. Almost half of them are children, we're told.
It's unreal. It really is. And here we are sponsoring Israel with $3.5 or so billion a year, sponsoring it militarily. According to the Guardian, Hamas rejected the ceasefire proposed by Egypt. Talk about the conditions on either side and why Hamas rejected the proposal.
Well, basically, Israel's operation has been largely successful. It's been able to damage Hamas heavily, so say some Israeli officials. On the Hamas side, Hamas has not been able to really hit Israel at all because of the success of the Iron Dome system. And this Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire basically was conditionless. So Hamas would have won no medium or long-term strategic benefits for the Palestinians or itself. For example, the lifting of the siege of Gaza, easing of restrictions on Palestinians' freedom of movement, and etc. There was nothing involved in the Egyptian proposal. So Hamas saw this as something which was basically untenable for it, having just lost, of course, hundreds of Palestinians, accepting a ceasefire when Israel has paid nothing. Basically, just one Israeli has been killed as a result of the rocket fire. Hamas sees that as unacceptable. And so we have this, I mean, humanistically speaking, perverse situation where the ceasefire was rejected from the side which is being massacred for these kind of long-term strategic vision, so to speak.
Yeah, right. Hamas wasn't involved in the process, as I understand it, kind of went over the head of which is the democratically elected leadership in part of Gaza, which is another thing people don't really realize. Let's talk about the ground assault, because IDF senior officials are saying that likelihood's very high of a full-blown ground invasion of army-less Gaza. What could that mean for the residents there? We have about a minute left.
Well, honestly, Abby, this time I think it's much more probable to have a ground invasion. Certainly in the Israeli political sphere, there's been much more noise about a ground invasion, much more explicit statements if we compare this war to the previous war in November 2012. So I think the chances are much higher. Even the United Nations here has said that it fears that Israel will commit a ground invasion of some kind as this continues. And just today, at least 4 Palestinian children were killed. Tonight, of course, rockets will be fiercely fired into Israel. Israel will fiercely respond. There's no sign that this is going away anytime soon.
There's no military solution. Harry, thanks for being on the ground, risking your life to document the truth. Really appreciate you coming on. Harry Fear, journalist, documentary filmmaker.